Howdy, folks. Figured I haven't made a video in a while, and this is at least somewhat related to retro gaming or whatever this channel is supposed to be about. So, there are a couple of things about this game here. They actually have been bothering me a little bit. It's called Game Dev Tycoon, which probably should be in the title, but I haven't created the title of the video yet, so maybe I'll just leave it out for no reason. Or not. Anyway, the thing that keeps bothering me about some of these things is that, for one thing, Atari gets left out entirely somehow. Now Atari didn't do too well in most of the, I guess, post 84, 85, 86 era, but they had various systems. I think they even had a computer line or something that was at least somewhat successful. I'm not sure exactly how well that worked because I really never knew anything about Atari computers. I don't really have one of those. It's one of the things that I kind of want to see what they look like, how they are, but it's not really terribly relevant because from what I can tell, a lot of them were sort of like kind of like Macintosh or Apple computers, albeit the old 8-bit Atari computers are actually closer to like the Texas Instruments and Commodore 64 or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, I don't have anything really to say about them, so it is what it is. But there's a lack of, well, one thing, the Atari 2600 really didn't die out completely until it's really highly debatable, but like, let's say they died out in 1990, because that's like a round number at least, and I think the wiki says like 1991, but that's just simply probably like they produced consoles until then, possibly, and it also, the wiki says a lot of things, so, but yeah, I mean, there's the 2600 Junior was supposed to be like a budget console, and that was running at the same time as the Atari 7800, 8-bit Nintendo systems. Like, it wasn't advertised as the best, most technical game system, but it was still running. And to an extent, if you were trying to do a startup company, the 2600 wasn't a bad idea to try to make a game for. There were a lot of people who actually owned Atari 2600s, despite the fact that the game crash had happened, and there were some people that developed games for them after even the 8-bit Nintendo came out. I mean, it's probably not that many. I'd have to actually take a look to see how many games actually got released, but I know there was one particular game that was fairly late that was really awesome on the Atari 2600 that really pushed what the 2600 can do, and I wouldn't imagine that being not a good seller, because if you could create a really good game and people didn't have to buy a new system for it, I mean, that's actually kind of nice. Heck, Princess Rescue game that somebody made as a homebrew on the Atari 2600 wouldn't have been a bad thing, except for the fact that, you know, nobody really was thinking about that too much, because Atari 2600 did have its limitations, and probably would take a while for people to do research and development on how to actually code the thing properly, because there are so many tricks that you have to learn about the system before you can actually figure out how to do something like that. Anyway, one thing about this is that they actually patched this game. I'm not sure exactly when they patched the game. I can't seem to find a date on it, but you won't see anything about odd peripherals on this research or even the game. You'll see hints about how certain genres are affected by certain audiences, which are affected by certain systems and topics, so on and so forth. So you'll find those, and they're very nice. It's very nice to have the hints like built in, because you'll sit there and you'll be like, I don't remember all the time, and they actually give you a find it. But at some point, once we get on an actual game, we'll figure out a. I think I actually did that not long ago. But basically, there's a game report you can have one of the employees do up, which will improve the number of hints that you see. And you'll see right there they have like good combo. Medieval RPG is a good combo. Yeah, well, testing time. Yeah, one other thing that we're kind of missing on here is other systems, like the Sega Saturn doesn't really show up at all. I know it would be like a Vena, whatever name they could come up with. The nice thing about this also is that there's a Steam Workshop, so there is actually a patch, not really a patch, but like a Steam Workshop project, I guess you'd call it, that has all of the Atari systems from the 7800 onwards, basically. The developer says that the 2600 wasn't relevant by the time. That's like I said, it's a little arguable, because even though it's not terribly relevant for selling systems, and they still tried, which they probably shouldn't have, but I mean, like, they still tried. And, but, like, you can't ignore everybody and their brother having an Atari 2600. Even ages later, when I was younger, because I'm not that old, unfortunately, everybody and their brother had some version of the Atari 2600, it seems like, still. And that was just kind of amazing, because obviously then you have, everybody has this system. So you can trade games with anybody, just about. My friend had the expansion pack for the ColecoVision. That was the other thing. I would have to do a little more research. Oh, and this thing you have to make sure you keep an eye on. Like, they make it so you can actually rename your games, but you have to keep an eye on the checkbox off. Because if you don't hit the check, it doesn't change the actual. You'll see the hints over there and so on and so forth. It doesn't actually change the name if you don't hit the checkbox. So you can end up getting like terrible named games, like game number 55, simply because you forgot to type in the name in the first place, and then it doesn't matter because game number 55 is like, you change it there at the end of the screen because you're like, oh, I forgot to do that, but then you forget to hit the checkbox immediately afterwards, so it just doesn't work. Kind of a disappointment. It would be nice if it would just, you know, be okay with me just typing in the name and not half force me to hit the checkbox, but that's okay. I had a couple more thoughts that I already organized a little bit, but keep in mind I'm trying to do this really off of memory, which is why I might pause occasionally. Yep, there we go. We got a port. But basically, this game, like, you have to, like, you even want to kind of put it into its own little category, because it's not really a historic game because of all the omissions that I was talking about, and that's not even including the TurboGrafx, Neo Geo, possibly some of the other systems that were out there that happened, including the 3DO. Actually, I think the 3DO would be more relevant than a lot of the other things, other than maybe like I said, the Neo Geo and the TurboGrafx, which I didn't know anybody who had a Neo Geo or TurboGrafx, and I haven't really ever even seen a TurboGrafx in person for some reason. Like, I even go to the retro gaming shops and they don't have any in stock. Like, how are we supposed to figure this out? Okay. I mean, I see a few hue cards or whatever they want to call them, but not really any actual systems. But yeah, this is a sim game, kind of. They kind of put you back in history. It's not really a history game. It's not really an alternate history game. I really wouldn't call this an alternate history game because, like, you're not really altering history. Like, you create a company to participate in history, but you can't alter it. Like, all these little historical events, you just kind of see that they just keep going on. They don't change. A lot of the game systems that failed primarily because of the software library that they had. Like, if you go back onto them and you look at all their technical capacity, you could have had really good systems. Software libraries on a lot of the systems that failed. But a lot of them don't seem to have very good software libraries because they couldn't convince developers that it was worth their time. To an extent, convincing developers that it's worth their time is to become a good seller of the system, but also during like the 3DO Jaguar era, a lot of what was going on was that developers didn't want to learn how to program these particular systems because 32-bit processing, and especially with certain ways that the 3DO and especially the Jaguar's RISC processors, nobody knew really how to do it, so you'd have to learn how to program it basically. And like that unfriendliness is part of the reason why those failed. But if there were enough people that could have gotten past that would have probably been just fine. Wouldn't have been complete flops, at least. And a lot of the gaps in the software libraries for a lot of the game systems, like, if you could actually fill them in, like, there's a profound amount of research that you could do to give the idea that you could extend the life of a game system, probably never actually revive it, but at least extend the life of the game system if somebody, say, put a system seller out. And that's the other thing. So there's games that could be called system sellers, but none of the games that you will create will ever sell a single system on this game. That's really why it's very, you participate, but you don't actually alter history on this game. And to an extent, I don't particularly care for like the categorizations that they do here with small, medium, large, and the AAA. You know that there's going to be like the idea is that it's supposed to be scale, essentially. Like, you create these larger games so there's more scale, but you could create a small game with a really good engine. It feels like. That's the other thing. That was the one thing that I was just going to bring up. Nowhere does it seem like there's any actual technical limitations that you reach on any of these systems. One of the things that really bothers me, especially in the early game, is that you can get the Game Link, which is essentially the Game Boy from Nintendo, and there's no, like, the Game Boy had no colors. You could barely do anything with it, had terrible refresh rates. It was basically only good simply because of the fact that it was basically the only really easy to program, compact, and good-selling portable game system that was out there. It wasn't even really terribly portable either until they shrunk it down, obviously. But basically, you wanted to create a game on there, you couldn't make it very fancy. But with this, like, especially once you notice that, hey, look, market share is huge for the Game Link, you might want to develop games for the Game Link. And then you throw on, like, the most extravagant graphics that you can. Like, let's get 3D version 1 on here. Like, how do you get 3D graphics on Game Boy? I mean, I guess you could probably figure a way out. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways that a lot of people have figured out ways to structure the old systems here. But back in those days, like 3D graphical engines were a bit. Well, I keep remembering to toss these because if you accidentally do a small project, it tosses everybody out, and you can't put the last project's configuration in because the last project's configuration had no employees involved. So I'm going to just be silent for a little while here. I'm going to hopefully not make too much noise along the way, but I'm going to be silent for a little while so I can let things go through. Maybe I'll get back to you in a few minutes. That way, I won't bore everybody to death with rambling on too much. I'll just enjoy the silly section of the game. Yeah, one thing I do like about this game is how it reminds you of the sort of golden age of programming, I guess you'd call it, where the first stage you have, you start out in a garage. Pretty simple. You can even do text-based games. You could do graphical-based games too, though. And most people do recommend using graphical-based games because, obviously, you want to learn how to actually do the graphics, so you can improve your graphical-based abilities. Like, see here, I do have access to Graphics V, Graphics V1, and I could totally do that on the Game Boy. Problem being that I don't see how that would even work. But it's kind of interesting because when you make your own console, it actually does give you sort of basically you have to. A console is like an enormous engine that you have to build in the game. Like, it costs so many millions of dollars to create. But you create this basically like this console, which is an engine, and then like you sell it. And I'm guessing, what I would guess is that engine, like those engine features that you're putting in, is essentially the capabilities of the game console. So does it actually like it's nearly impossible to actually get to that point. I mean, like, you can get to that point, but it's a little more difficult to do that because obviously you have to get to that point and have tons and tons and tons of cash to develop the console. You have to then develop games for the console. Then you might have to develop more technology, which may even mean that if that limits you, then you have to develop a new console simply to, you know, create the new set of games, essentially, and then that sounds incredibly expensive from the game standpoint. Anyway, it just sounds like a bad idea. Yeah, like, you now see the Nintendo 64. Don't see the Jaguar ever. Don't see the Sega Saturn ever. Don't see a lot of things. Like, all of the more modern game systems are pretty much in there. Including in the Ouya, and I really wonder why the Ouya is in here. Like, the last game, and here's the settings menu, just in case you're wondering. Not much in the settings. And yeah, you can do mods now. So it's very nice and helpful to get mods into the system. Simply because, and it is very tempting to try to see if I can actually possibly look into doing the mods, because it sounds like it has something to do with HTML5. I wouldn't be surprised because this kind of looks like an internet-based game almost, kind of, sort of, flash game kind of thing. But I would have to take a look into it a little more deeply. It's possible it could even just start with like the Atari mod, which, I don't know, the Atari mod, like, I think I'd probably find problems with the Atari mod if I did that way. So I might actually just want to do things by scratch, because it's just like, there's just so much. Like, this could, like, to me, I kind of feel like this needs to be a more historic game. Really. But, I mean, it is fun. I played probably 8 hours of it. It's only a $10 game. It isn't terrible. But it's always nice to have a little more enrichment while you're playing. This part of what makes it fun is the fact that these whole milestones and events keep happening that you just know, oh, right, that's what happened. Yeah. The PlayStation was supposed to be another version of the Super NES. I mean, getting multiple games that are really good in a row are really difficult to do. What was the profit? The profit, I don't, like, I always wonder about, like, the profit, like, is that actually the profit, or is that the profit without all the monthly expenses for developing the game? But then you just be like, yeah, well, I mean, I had some fixed expenses that I had to pay for, so it's not really covering. If it's not really covering those, then you need to find a better way of doing things. These contracts are really only basically for research points. I find like you really don't make your money back on these contracts because you have like huge amounts of. And if you fail the contract, you're definitely not getting your money back because you're not getting paid for it. You have to pay them for it. But I mean, I've even taken contracts that I knew the team didn't or isn't able to do simply just to get a bunch of research points, so that you can research the next thing or train somebody, or like these are easiest pie ones because like some of these are just made for like 1 or 2 people, but some of them like that looks like you need like a full team of 5 people. You can get like some of the larger ones can seem like they're actually worth your time, but again, the larger ones take longer to actually complete too, and they carry the risk of not completing them in time, especially if you have somebody say over there trying to train while everybody else is trying to do the work. Didn't fail that time, but it's just kind of like you can easily fail simply because of all that going on. I really wish it would stop defaulting them small again, but can't really help that too much. graphics V1. Actually, they went straight into the DS too. They didn't actually go into the Game Boy Color or the Game Boy Advance, or those are actually kind of odd omissions too. Like, I can see that they don't really need to worry about like multiple versions of a system, because obviously if it's just the same game for the same system, it just doesn't matter that much. But once you hit the hey, this game, you can make bigger games or better games for this system over that system, might have some relevance. Yeah, and you noticed all the hints. Look, sound needs to go, doesn't need it so much. I don't know if that's really truly completely correct, but it's at least partially correct. Super NES is no longer supported. You probably won't want to make any more games for them. Okay. Yep, I got game number 18 here. I have to make sure I rename that before it, becomes a problem. Rename! First fire. Don't forget to hit the check button. Release. I like just kind of trying to ninja like the review screen, just somebody trying to get as many people doing stuff as possible before the review screen comes up, because the review screen takes 10 freaking years to go through. I kind of wish I could click and get away from this, because I know it's ends. Okay, you guys want to give me a bunch of time and oh, come on. There's always one jerk. As you saw in the achievements earlier, there's a way to get 11. It's just that from what I've read, you have to get like specialists, and don't really want to deal with that too much. It doesn't seem to be terribly worthwhile. You have to kind of... It's just a game. That's all it is. Also, if somebody gets to tie the reference in the company name, cool. Mega Flop Productions. Yeah. I'm not going to talk any more than I have thoughts, but I kind of like how they like warn them or soothe them. Well, technically, does it really matter? If you warn them, you get more fans. If you sue them, do you get money? I guess I could check that out, but you probably don't really get much. A lot of these things where they keep giving you choices, there's not much to the choices because obviously you don't want to tick off your fans simply because you're trying to protect your property, so you get like $20,000 and you're like, hey, look, my budget is, by that time, usually millions of dollars. Like, why do I care that much? Which I guess kind of goes into the abandonware thing where you're like, yeah, they no longer really truly support this, therefore, okay, why do I want to bother with them? They also even do the please release your old engine as an open source or something like that, like id Software did, or ID Software, as I like to call them, because heck, their ID Software, they have an I and then they have a D, and their software company. To an extent, you kind of wonder why they don't do that, because more often, because if you got an old engine that you never use anymore, that's out of date, that no competitor would, in their right mind, would probably use, why don't you release it? Like, it creates a much better life for your games that when they die out. And you'll be that company, that guy, that company that actually dealt with all of this and didn't. This doesn't seem to make sense sometimes when they don't want to give up. Like I know now it's like good old games is getting us actual property rights and stuff. Now it's actually doing a lot better because hey, we can sort of sell a few games here and there for people who are like, yeah, I remember this old game. I can't seem to find it, but I want to, have it again. That's fine. But it's that just so convoluted because sometimes the rights to certain games will get stuck in some weird places for companies that you have no idea who they are. Like, you check out LGR's Chips Challenge 2, like, that problem. Like, you get this company that bought up the rights, but they don't have any intention of actually using them for any reason. Yeah. Lucky world. I think I'll end this here. I'll let the video continue on, but I'm pretty much done talking.